think I'm good too. Okay, welcome everyone. So I'm Jay Lyman, and I want to welcome you to this program here this evening. I'm going to turn things over very quickly here to Michael Coffey, who will introduce the program. There's going to be plenty of time for questions, both on camera and off camera, if you prefer. So you can, if you don't want those to happen on camera, you can type them in the chat, and I'll say them out loud. But thank you for being here, Michael, and take it away.
Great, thanks, Jay. Welcome everyone, and thank you to the interpreters and the captioners. My name is Michael Coffey, and let me share my screen. Whoop. I need to share my screen with in the right place. There we go. Hopefully that looks right for everyone. This is Marketing Basics, and my name is Michael Coffey, as I said. My contact information is there on this first slide. Today, given that Twitter is going through some stuff right now, I changed my Twitter handle to my Mastodon handle. So if that's a thing that you do, that's the Michael C at scholar.social down there at the bottom. But email is on there. That's a great way to contact me if you have any questions after this session. So today we'll be talking about marketing basics. And for those that have come to several of these classes, it might seem a little weird to be looking at marketing basics at the end. But the reason for that is we wanted to have some pieces in place that often distract people from the process of marketing, and answer those questions. You know, people get worked up about social media or about, how are people using my website? And I don't even have a website. And so we wanted to get those out of the way, and answer those questions before kind of coming here to the how does it all work as a big system. Another reason to do that is that in helping all of my former clients, both at Ardea Coaching, which is my business, and at the Washington Women's Business Center, where I was a business, what was it called? Business Assistance Officer is the title. Like I have helped 400, 500 business owners one-on-one over the course of several years. And something that comes up over and over again with entrepreneurs is that often they get really focused on making their product or figuring out what service they're going to offer, and kind of miss the bigger picture. And so they're like super focused on, I'm going to make a sale, I'm going to make a sale, I'm going to place ads, and that'll give me more sales. But there's more to it than that. And so this is a broader course to look at all of the things that go into a marketing plan. Now, I've so far mentioned business specifically, entrepreneurs specifically, but this also applies to nonprofits as well. Because as we'll see in a moment, marketing is really trying to move someone somewhere. right? So if you have some goal, if you want to get people to sign your petition, if you want to get people to change their mind about an issue or start doing something on a regular basis that they were not doing before, all of that is kind of marketing, whether it's specifically for a business or not. Okay, so we are speaking about this very broadly. Another thing which Jay alluded to is I would love to answer your specific questions about marketing. Um, there's thousands and thousands of questions that people have about marketing, and I want to be useful to you. So as Jay said, you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly, interrupt me, or you can type it in the chat, and Jay will stop and ask for you. So if you're shy, if you're introverted like me, um, you can get your questions asked in that way, and you can just stay in the background. So, all right, so let's get going. Whoop, use the correct mouse. I've got two computers here going on. So marketing basics, this is what we're going to be going over today. First, what is marketing? I gave you a little teaser before, but we'll first talk about, define that a little bit better. And then we will talk about these 4 words that begin with an M: market, message, media, and method. And of course, sort of how they fit together. And then we will have a generous portion at the end for Q&A, anything that sort of didn't get answered through the course of the course. So, oh, and this is my guy. I often use a lot of old time pictures because, let's face it, not everyone is really comfortable with technology. And so I use old pictures to kind of remind people that, this kind of stuff has been going on forever. There's, if you have watched HBO's show Rome, there's a great scene that I like that has, or set of scenes that has the newsreader who stands out in the forum and calls out, things that are happening in the empire. And he will often end with, these messages brought to you by the bread bakers of Rome, true Roman bread for true Romans. So there has been marketing going on forever. And so if we start talking about technology and that concerns you, just ignore the technology and look for what would we have done in the Roman Empire or whatever. Okay, because technology is just sort of the outer layer and is not critical to what we'll talk about. Okay, so the question of the hour is, what is marketing? And I'd like to start by having anyone in the audience that has ideas, suggest them. Either unmute yourself or put them in the chat. What is marketing?
Is it advertising?
Yeah, I was about to say, like I've primed you in the wrong direction with this image. Because yes, I mean, advertising is part of marketing, but there's so much more than advertising to marketing. What kinds of things could you do beyond advertising?
go ahead and type stuff into the chat or ask out loud if you like. Thinking like
Yes.
networking is, and finding an audience, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So researching your audience, marketing is letting people know my business exists. Yeah. Yeah. And that doesn't have to happen through an ad, right? It can be, I used to work down in the Pike Place Market for a couple of years, and a sandwich board. It's not an ad exactly, right? But it is sort of like, hey, here we are. A sign is marketing. What you have in your window display, if you have you know, yeah, all that networking, as Jay mentioned. Yeah. So I want you to think broadly. I want you to think marketing is a really big thing. And I will say, I am currently teaching right at this moment a marketing class. But I have had sort of a love-hate relationship with marketing. And in fact, more than once have said that marketing was a 4-letter word. um, uh, but that's because marketing in some cases can be manipulative. And it's easy to get caught up in the sort of the badness of that. But marketing can also be done in a good way, in a people-centered way. And that's what I tend to focus on when helping people in a class or working with clients. So think of all of the ways that you could let people know what you do. Okay. All right. So I'm going to pause here as a place for translators to switch or for any last questions before I move on to a little bit more specific information. Please advance the slide. There we go. Okay. So what is marketing? My definition of marketing is anything that delivers a message to a particular group of people that moves them closer to the cash register. And again, I say cash register because I mostly work with small business owners, entrepreneurs, but the cash register can represent whatever action you want to happen. So again, for a nonprofit, that could be, signing up for your newsletter or making a donation. Okay. So whatever that thing is, that's the cash register. And so marketing is anything that moves people along from where they start, where they first hear that message, and gets them a step closer. And so notice that I've got here this giant blue circle relative to the cash register. And there's a little part of that that's called ads. Yes, ads are part of marketing, but ads are not the majority of marketing. If you do not like ads, you don't have to do them. That's fine. If you love ads, I would say, great, do them. But also look at the stuff that you're not doing, because you may be leaving tools on the table, or tools in your toolbox. You're not using tools that you could be using that could help move people towards the cash register. Now, sales is different than marketing. Sales is specifically the process of making that exchange, making that one task actually happen. It's not about moving people closer, it's about finishing it. Okay? So marketing is moving people closer. Sales is the transaction itself, or whatever you are defining. And then marketing starts again. Because even more marketing happens after they've done the thing that you want. Why? Because they can come back, right? They're not at the cash register anymore. And so you can start moving them back towards yourself again. Okay. Yeah, and again, sales, it could be volunteering, getting someone to volunteer for your organization if you're not, doing sales. All right. So marketing is about movement. There's a lot of M words today. Uh, so here we are, 4 M words. And this is a memory aid that I came up with because I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs that kind of were just reaching and grasping for, what does this mean to market my business, to market my product? Because many times an entrepreneur is the technician in the business. They're the one who knows how to bake the bread at the bakery, but that's a different skill set than marketing. And so if you are the technician, if you're the one that does the service or makes the product, marketing is a whole different skill set that you still have to have in place. Okay. So so these 4 M's of marketing are the 4 critical pieces of having a good marketing plan. These are necessary. Now, sometimes people will say something like, well, is it really necessary? Do I really have to have? And I came up with, there is a possibility that you don't have to have all 4. There is a 5th M word that that you can substitute in here for any one of these, and that's a miracle. So you can, if you have a miracle that you can pull off, then you don't necessarily have to have all of these. But if you don't have a miracle in your pocket, then you should have all 4. Okay. So, to go over each of these briefly, there's the market, and that is both your customers and your competitors. Because your customers are trying to solve a problem, they're trying to make their lives better in some way, and you are offering them something, but yours is not the only offer that they see. Yours is not the only option that they have. Even if no one is doing what you are doing, they can choose other things. They can choose not to buy from you. And so what your competitors are doing impacts what your customers choose. So they are part of the market as well. The message is what you are offering and how you describe it. We'll talk more about all the ways that that happens. The media is, again, very broad. We often talk about media like broadcast media or social media, but I'm speaking like just how do you get out there? Jay said networking earlier. Well, the media of networking is, just talking to people. That's the media, is your voice. So how and where do you deliver this message? And then the method, and sometimes I call this the mechanics, is all the stuff behind the scenes. Like, what tools do you use? What procedures do you have? It's all the stuff behind the scenes that is not specifically about communicating with your customers, but still contributes. Okay. So Jay has appeared on camera just in time for me to say, any questions?
Any questions?
Put them in the chat, say them out loud. If you don't ask questions, my ego will get big because I will think I'm an amazing teacher, answering everyone's questions before they even have them. I would prefer to answer your specific questions if you have them. All right, I will move on. I must be amazing. All right. So here we are. Here is a market. And there are a lot of terms that in English sound like this. The market, marketplace, target market. I am using this term to include all of those. So it's the people you hope to sell to. It's the people who you don't necessarily focus on selling to, but maybe buy from you anyway. It's all of the other stalls in the marketplace, this, farmer's market image, right? It's, if I'm selling vegetables at the farmer's market, I'm not the only person selling vegetables. So there are factors here like pricing. If I'm selling carrots and I'm selling them for $50 a bunch, and the lady two stalls down is selling them for, $10 a bunch. Well, doesn't matter how great they are. No one's going to buy mine, until she sells out. So what is right for you will change depending on what everyone else is doing. A Nobel Prize was given to John Nash in economics for basically describing that mathematically, that the right strategy, there isn't a right strategy for you independent of other people. It's the combination that matters. There's also the customers and what you know about them. So at the end, Jay will no doubt talk about resources that the library has to help you understand your customers. And in fact, I have an image of a mosaic of customer traits that that we'll talk about in a minute. But knowing about your customers, knowing about the competitors, and knowing that nothing is a competitor. So I like to think of the marketplace. If I had a movie theater, and we're erasing all considerations here of pandemic and stuff like that, which is just adds complexity. But if I had a movie theater, I could think my competitors are just other movie theaters. But think of this from a customer's perspective. If you're thinking about going to a movie, are you always 100% dedicated to seeing a movie in a movie theater, and your only options are which movie theater to go to? Sometimes, but oftentimes what you are looking for is entertainment. And if what you are looking for is entertainment, then not just movie theaters are possibilities. It's possible that you could go to trivia night at the local pub. It could be that you could stay home and play a board game. It could be that you watch TV or stream something, or doom scroll on your favorite social media site, or right, like there's all kinds of things that you could do that have nothing to do with movie theaters. So nothing is one of your competitors, right? You know, too expensive, not going to pay for it. I'm just gonna, read a book, right? I've got a library, right? There's great books in the library. Ebooks too, so you don't, anyway. Uh, I'll let the librarians talk about that. And speaking of books, how's this for translation? One of the ways to find out about your customers' needs and the things that they think about and how they think about them. I really like this book. It is called Ask by Ryan Levesque. Hopefully you can see that without too much reflection. I'm sure Jay will put a link to resources in the chat, but it's an entire book about using surveys to gather information about your target market and what they want, and even using those surveys to narrow down who are your most likely customers and to create products or services specifically to meet the needs of those people. Okay, so when you release a new product or release a new service, it is targeted to what actual real life people said that they wanted. So just looking at the chat there, distracted. So yeah, it's a great book for kind of getting into the complexities of that. So that's the market. Okay, that's our first M. Your customers, your knowledge of your customers, your competitors, your knowledge of what they're doing and what their specialties are and what their weaknesses are. Because if you can do something better than them, like the lady in the two stalls down can be like, well, yeah, you could go to Michael, but his carrots are $50 a bunch. So like that might be a good thing for her marketing, is to point out how expensive my carrots are. My response then might be to say, well, yes, my carrots are more expensive, but they taste better and you get tomatoes thrown in, right? You know, like, and so it becomes a dynamic thing. Okay, so that's the market. Now the message. So the message comes second. The message comes second because it depends on those previous things. It depends on who are the people and what are the competitors doing, right? So my example of what does my competitor in the other stall say about my carrot prices, and what do I say about her carrot quality, and those kinds of things. Those are messages, and they depend on the people. So take a moment and imagine you see an ad, okay? And it starts with a voiceover by, uh, a lovely voice that you recognize saying, "You've set the candle, you set the table and lit the candles. Glenn Miller is softly playing on the record player." Okay, now I've mentioned Glenn Miller and I've mentioned a record player. You already know something about who I'm trying to reach, right? Right? I'm not going for Gen Z. I'm not going for teenagers if I'm talking about record players and Glenn Miller, right? Now, imagine I say, instead of Glenn Miller is softly playing on the record player, I say, your Adele playlist is playing in the background, or your Taylor Swift playlist is playing in the background, or, sorry, your Kanye playlist is playing in the background, right? Those shift who you think is being talked to, because just the choice of music is enough to shift who the audience reaches. I mean, who the message reaches. I've heard stories of organizations that thought that they were trying to reach a certain target market, a certain group demographic. And then they do some research and realize that, oh, it's actually, they were about 10 years off on the average age. And so they tweak the music so that it's more appropriate for that new age group, and sales will shoot up. Okay. So that's part of a message. Wording matters. There was, 10, 20 years ago, there was an interesting experiment that was done. This was before Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, and a survey was done. And they asked a whole bunch of people, like random calls, and they asked people one of two questions. Some people got the question, do you support gay marriage? The other people got the question, do you support homosexual marriage? Now, there's no difference between those questions, right? They're just changing one word for another word that basically means the same thing. Overwhelmingly, people responded yes to, do you support gay marriage? And overwhelmingly responded no to, do you support homosexual marriage? Weird, right? Individual words can make a huge difference in your message, in what people think about what you're saying. Another consideration for your message is, what is your goal? Do you want people to trust you? Do you want people to desire what you offer? Do you want people to laugh just so that they have a positive feeling about your company? What do you want? What change do you want to have in your audience? What makes whatever you're trying to do irresistible? So it's not just words, but it's music, it's images, it's colors, it's sounds. It's like I saw a guy this morning um, in a vest, kind of a puffy vest, and it was blue, and it had sort of a particular shade of red stripe and then a particular shade of orange stripe on his little puffy vest. And I was like, oh, I see you're a fan of Mork and Mindy, because it it looked like Mork of Ork, which, if you are younger than I am, was a comedy show from the late 80s, I want to say, something like that. Um, but it was the colors for me. Like I just saw this particular set of colors and I'm like, that is this particular character's outfit. And it was all because of the colors. And it was because of my particular age. It can be behavior. It can be clothing. It can be packaging of your product. It used to be in the tea industry. I worked in the tea industry for a long time. I know it's ironic that my last name is Coffee, but I worked in tea. But it used to be that the price of tea was a really good indicator of its quality. The pricier it was, the better it was in 90% of the cases. And then tea got big or whatever, and a bunch of marketers came in and started taking low quality tea and putting it in really, really nice packaging and charging 2 or 3 times what it was worth. And that worked. Lots and lots of people bought subpar tea because it was in a lovely little box. That works. Not my favorite example of the best of marketing, but you know, if you're trying to make money selling tea, it's a thing that works. So just look at all of those things. But one warning before I ask for questions. So think of questions. One warning, you should always have other people look at what you're thinking of saying. Have people check it over. Have people, you know, like if you've got a team, have everyone look at it. If you know some people that are in your target market, try it out on them. Because you can you can run into some problems. 3 examples. 1, the Chevy Nova was they attempted to sell in Mexico, and Nova doesn't go in Spanish. Not a great name for a car, right? Another example is Coca-Cola in Chinese. First, they marketed it as Coca-Cola. Great. That's how you say it. Except that the characters that they used to write it translated to bite the wax tadpole, which doesn't sound like something you want to do. So they renamed it with different characters that didn't sound quite like Coca-Cola, but close enough. Coca-Cola. which means happiness in the mouth. Much better name for a drink. um, and uh, and and sometimes it's not like your product name. Sometimes it's just you've made an error, or not even an error. You've made a word choice that isn't great. And my favorite example of this was a headline about a group of people who were going to Rome to request something of the Pope. And the headline read, "Prostitutes appeal to Pope," which they did. This group of sex workers was requesting something from the Pope, but the headline could be interpreted as "the Pope likes prostitutes." Maybe that was on purpose, or maybe that was an error. We don't know. So you need to sort of look at your message from lots of different areas, from lots of different viewpoints, to make sure that it's going to arrive in the same way that you mean it. All right, so questions. I see that Jay has said, what? Yeah.
That was related to the frog.
The bite the wax tadpole.
Wax tadpole.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. There.
There we go.
So any questions about message or market?
Would brand kind of go into this message and market?
Yeah, branding is a message. So there are different brands that are associated with particular ideas or values, and that's part of the message. The one I always use is as Volvo is associated with safety. But there's all kinds of brands that you might think of with any kind of word that you might throw out there. Adventure, right? Maybe you think of some kind of outdoors shop, or maybe you think of a travel company, or whatever, but adventure might be something that you think of. Safety, taste, quality, all kinds of things. So that branding is part of the message. Okay, I will move on. We've got 2 of our 4. And again, there. Media. So like I said earlier, media is how you communicate. You can't mail a letter without an address. In order to get your message to someone, there has to be some way, some media, you might call it, to get it there, right? In the case of a letter, it could be an envelope, right? That's the media that gets your letter to your medium, I guess, in English, of getting your letter to the intended recipient. And this comes third because, you need to know who the recipient is. That's your first one. You need to know what you want to say to them. That's the letter. Okay, now you know who the recipient is. You've written the letter to them. Now you get to put it in the envelope and get it to them, deliver it to them. I'll get to this image here in just a second, but first I want to tell a story that I may have told in a previous class, but for those who may not be in Seattle, we have a magazine here called The Stranger, which is kind of a lefty, edgy weekly newspaper. And I had a client who was going to manufacture dentures. And I was like, okay, great. How are you going to market? And he was like, oh, I'm going to take out ads in The Stranger. And at first I was like, oh, okay, so maybe he's not, like when you said dentures, I thought old people. And but then you said strangers. And so then I was thinking, oh, maybe skateboarders who have knocked out teeth or, whatever. And so I was like, oh, so who's your target market? And he's like, old people. I'm like, maybe I don't know the readers of The Stranger well enough. Like, that's not my stereotypical picture of a stranger reader, but maybe. And so I asked him, oh, so how many elderly people read The Stranger? Like, what percentage of their audience is retirees? Like, I don't know. And he was like, oh, do you think I should or advertise somewhere else? I was like, well, I don't know. You should advertise where your customers are going to be. Like, if they're at The Stranger, go for it. But if they're not, that's wasting your money. Right? So, and there is a little bit of interplay with your message here. You might have slightly different messages depending on where they're going to appear. That's okay. But different people have different channel preferences. We'll just use that term because it's here on this slide. And they have different levels of comfort with technology. And that's one of the things that you can learn about your market. Who are these people? Where do they get their information? And Jay can correct me here, but I believe how these symbols work, is if you're over 100, that means that this particular group of people are more likely to pay attention to this area. And if it's below 100, they're less likely than average.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay.
Yep. 100 is the national norm for each of these. And then any number above 100 means that they're above that norm for each of those.
So for this particular group, and I don't even know who this is, like, I don't know what group this is, but there's statistics, which Jay can talk about later, that, the library can help you find.
Yep.
But this particular group, I would definitely want to use email marketing to reach, because this group loves email. They are almost 3 times more likely to respond to an email than the national average. Social media looks pretty good too. Maybe snail mail. But, advertising on my local NPR station,
Nope.
no, they are not listening to the radio. Right?
And that includes podcast also.
That includes podcasts.
So, they're not listening to whichever group this is, they're not listening to the radio. They're not listening to podcast.
So audio is out.
Audio is out for this group. TV, they're below, but they're not it's not as bad as the audio. And that also would include streaming video as well. So, like, would I create
YouTube or something?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then the little bubble with the three dots is text messaging,
Oh,
SMS.
okay.
So that'd be that one, and then so that one's not too bad, but you know, definitely like if for this group, I'm going to try to build an email list, uh, maybe an address list, try to get some social media uh, things. That's how I'm going to approach this group.
Right. Right. And like the texting one is interesting because I, I and maybe this is just my demographic, but I don't know anyone that is enthusiastic about getting a text message from a company that's trying to sell something to them.
Yeah,
So that could be a tricky, I mean, this group might probably not worth figuring that out, but there might be a group that has a really high number in that lower left thing. And
yeah,
then it would be, like there might be a challenge to figure out what's the right way to do this. Maybe you need to be doing events that you need to, like we're giving push notifications to people that we're going to do this thing. And, you know, so that's information that's available to you, right?
yep,
Um, and then the other one is technology adoption. Um, my grandmother, um, before she passed, was in her 90s and was absolutely convinced that she was, come hell or high water, going to tackle email. She was going to learn how to do this. Um, she was different than most people in her age group. um, so different groups use technology differently, and some are resistant to it, and some are, lean into it, and some are somewhere in the middle. That too can influence the best ways to reach out to people. Okay. So just because you are comfortable with a particular thing does not mean your audience is comfortable with it. You need to use the tools that your audience likes, not the ones that you like. Your preferences don't matter. A little bit of reality here. The people you want to sell to probably don't care about you. Most of them. Some of them do, but most of them don't care about you. So you need to go 90% of the way to them to show that you understand them and what they like before they will listen to you. Okay. That's why media is so important. And this information is what I was referring to when I said a mosaic of information, because this is from a thing called Mosaic. Is it still called Mosaics, or did they change the name?
yep.
Okay.
Still mosaics, and so we can pull the mosaics by geography, like zip code, state, city, so we can start to get this kind of data about particular geographical areas, like people who live in particular geographical areas.
Can you get all the way down to census tract on this, or
Yeah,
is it just zip code? Yeah,
no,
census tract.
census tract. So you can
So
draw like couple blocks of a city and really get to like, oh wow, there's these three dominant lifestyle groups, and and all of them have a really high rating for email marketing. Guess what I'm going to choose?
thank
Tina's
you,
Tina's
Tina.
Tina's Tina knows about this stuff too.
um, yeah. So there's some great information out there. But yeah, so like census tracts, you can get this kind of information for like a little set. when I walk to the grocery store, I walk through like 2 or 3 census tracts, just, walking to the store. So it's like super fine level of detail. Now, one block to the next, probably not a huge difference, but um, if you're looking for if you're doing like a coffee shop, right? How the distance that you draw people from for a coffee shop is fairly small. And so you may want something that's that, like, yeah, there's 10 coffee shops just in this neighborhood. So I'm worried about, like 4 blocks in each direction from me. Like, what do those people care about? Okay. Um, and then method. So this is an image from The Wizard of Oz, if anyone doesn't recognize that. And this is the man behind the curtain. Um, this is your method. You've got the Wizard of Oz, pulling levers and twisting knobs and looking at the dials that the audience isn't supposed to see. These are your tools. This is stuff like your written marketing plan. You do want to write a marketing plan. And since I always do a shout out, the business model canvas is a free tool out there on the internet. You can search for images. There are YouTube videos about it. There's probably resources at the library. I don't know. But business model canvas is one way of starting to shape parts of your marketing plan. It could be your calendar to decide what themes will you have, for each month this year. Or it could be what classes are we having when, like the library has. It could be what posts am I going to put on social media? When is my newsletter going out, right? Calendar, great tool. It could be templates. So you may have templates for top 10 tips for doing X, whatever that is. It could be what's called a swipe file, which is when you see somebody else's marketing that gives you ideas, you can grab that and put it into a file for when you're feeling like, I don't know what to do now. Sometimes you're not feeling particularly inspired. Well, that's when you grab your swipe file and you kind of look through it and you see what other people do that inspired you before. And maybe you already had a plan for what to do next, but now you don't. It could be a list of your specific color definitions that are your branded colors. It could be your logo. It could be your employee procedures. How are employees supposed to deal with certain situations? Because customer service is part of your brand, part of your message. It could be materials that you send out um, to news outlets about things that you're doing. It could be the surveys, right? It could be, if you do a survey, it could be the data that you collect from that survey. Your best practices, phone scripts, your marketing goals, all of that stuff supports you in carrying out your marketing. It makes you better able to do the work. And all that stuff is really important. And all that stuff is really, really common to leave out of a marketing plan. I have at the Washington Women's Business Center, I read so many business plans and marketing plans, particularly that were going on to be business loans, business loan applications. And that's a place where I spent so much time with clients saying, well, wait a minute, how are you going to do that? How are you going to make sure you always do that? Could you write that down? Because it doesn't say that in here, and that's going to be a question that gets asked. I'm going to pull out another book. Get Clients Now. This is by C.J. Hayden. This is a book that is more suited to individuals providing a service. Individuals providing a service. So like coaches like myself, or therapists, independent therapists, massage therapists, personal trainers, that kind of business. But she walks you through a series of steps where you sort of choose from a list, like, well, okay, choose from here, and then based on that, choose from this list and so forth. And you use it to build a 1-month marketing plan with, so then for each day of the month, you just work through it and you do the thing that is set out for that particular day. So if you are brand new to marketing, that is a great place to kind of get your sea legs, as it were, get accustomed to the kind of structures that help you carry out marketing. Okay. And if you're not one of those kinds of businesses, it's still useful to see the sorts of things, the structure of what she does in that book. So, so definitely worth checking that out. Another book that I didn't mention before to our librarian friends is called Work the System by Sam Carpenter. And I am a little less enthusiastic about it, but it also is another take on how do you go from what's important to your company to having a set of procedures and systems. It's not as, it's got a lot of, well, this is what I did stories in it, which is not quite as helpful as 100% focused on you, but it's still useful. There you go. If you get a chance to do classes with librarians, it's great. Okay, so that's method. It's all of those behind the scenes structures. And I will stop here and ask if there are additional questions.
And I wanted to mention up a little bit in the little thread that Tina and I have going here. You were mentioning the business model canvas and classes at the workshop. Monday at 5 o'clock, we have someone teaching a class on lean business plans.
Oh, nice.
And that's gonna, and also Google Docs. So we're gonna be building a lean business plan in Google Docs. So join for that. If you're interested.
That sounds great.
Is going to teach that class. So
who was it?
His name is Andrew Powers.
Okay.
And so he's going to do 3 workshops. One, the first one is Monday, and then the following Monday, and then the Monday after that too.
Great. So I only have really one more slide. And then we can go into Q&A here. So there we go. So if you take those 4 elements that we've talked about tonight, the market, the message, the media, and the method, you add them up, you get a complete marketing plan. Complete-ish. You know, your business is unique. Your target market is probably unique. Your offering is unique. But if you have these 4 things, you've got something solid. If you leave any of these out, it can be problematic. They all build on each other and they all support each other. So definitely, oh, thank you, Tisha, sorry. Yeah, so definitely do all of these things and then carry it out using your method, and good luck. And with that, give credit where credit is due, which includes thanking our translators and our captioners. And I will pass it over to Jay to give any other, or to Tina, whoever's going to talk about the library stuff, and then we can do Q&A for those who don't want to be on the recording.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I guess the main thing I wanted to just say is that Tina and I are 2 of about 7 librarians that do this kind of support of entrepreneurs with data. And so that slide we were talking about and finding the mosaics and things, that's what we do in those appointments, is we help walk you through how to figure that out for your situation, you know, and how to search demographics now to get this kind of stuff so you can implement that in your own marketing plan and things. And so best way to do that is sign up for a business information appointment. I'll put the link in the chat, but we have those on an ongoing basis and they're free. They're virtual still because most people still want to work with us in that way. We have some, you know, coming up as soon as next week. So you can register for those, and it may be Tina, it might be me, it might be one of my other colleagues, but everybody that facilitates those appointments knows how to do this kind of research. So it's best starting place. You don't need to know anything about marketing, and we'll help you out with that.
And I will also throw out there, as someone who has, like I said, helped a lot of entrepreneurs apply to business loans, apply for business loans, or try to convince investors. That kind of data is what those people are expecting to see.
Yeah.
You know, bankers want to see that you're not just saying, no, I believe in myself. They want to see, yeah, well, there's, you know, 48% of the demographics in the people in this zip code, you know, spend on average this amount per household on, like, that's what they want to see. So do it.
Yes. Well, that's mainly what I wanted to say there. And I think we could probably, you know, shut down the recording and, you know, and thank everybody. So I echo what Michael said. Thank you to our captioner. Thank you to our interpreters for being here through this program and through all of the others as well. We look forward to seeing you next week if you're going to sign up for the last class in this series, Thinking with Data, where we'll kind of take off from what we were just talking about, of, like, you know, a data mindset and all of those kind of things.
And I will say that if you're scared of data, This is more emphasis on the thinking part than on the data part.
That's right.
So it's how do you use the information that's available to you? How do you make good decisions more so than we're going to do data science today?
Yeah, yeah. It's not for the data scientist. It's for
Right.
those who by definition don't know about that. Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and hope you'll join us for all of that. And we're gonna turn off the recording.